Hi, I'm Dan Aubuchon, and welcome back to the Joy of Tennis Teaching. We're going to start talking about tennis strategy today, and there's a lot of different aspects of tennis strategy that we can go into. We're going to start with one that was particularly important to Peter Burwash, and that's the idea of the triple E theory. Now, the three E's stood for emergency, exploitation, and execution. And we'll go into each of these three components. First of all, we've talked about this in the past. Tennis is a game of emergencies. Who deals with trouble the best is usually the winner of a match. The goal of a match is really to put your opponent into an emergency, not to hit a winning shot yourself. This is why there are a lot of different styles of play that can win. So what we want you to do is we want you to understand that the creation of an emergency and the dealing with the emergency are the two bedrocks of your strategy. The second word was exploitation. Now, what do we mean by that? What we mean with exploitation is to pick on a weakness of your opponent. And a lot of times my students tell me, oh, my opponent doesn't have any weaknesses. If I were to believe my students, the average club player is slightly better than Pete Sampras, Roger Federer, and Rafa Nadal rolled into one. So every player, no matter how good they are, has a weakness. And one of the ways to discover these weaknesses is to do what Peter called explore the opposites. So does your opponent like to hit on the move, or do they prefer standing still? Do they like high balls or low balls? Are they better when you hit with pace or when you give them a slow ball? Are they good at dealing with spin, or do they like a flat ball and they have trouble? They get into an emergency if you hit a spinning ball. We could go on with these opposites, and you should do that when you're a player. You should think about the opposites and self-scout your own game, and what do you like? What are your preferences? That way you'll know how to improve and how to protect against emergencies in a big way. So exploitation means figuring out what your opponent's weaknesses are and then picking on those weaknesses. And finally, we come to the third E, and that's execution. Execution is incredibly important because it doesn't do you a lot of good to know your opponent doesn't like low balls if you can't execute a good underspin shot to keep that ball low. I used to play a friend of mine back in the Woodlands, Texas, who was very, very good at returning my flat serve. But he wasn't very good at returning a kick serve. The problem was I couldn't execute a kick serve very well either. So it was a dilemma. Do I hit my best serve that he returns pretty well, or do I hit a serve that I'm not very good at executing, but it exploits my opponent's weakness? The answer was to practice my kick serve more. So the idea of the triple E theory is it's a fluid environment when you're out there on a tennis court. And if you can keep in mind the goal of putting your opponent into an emergency and also defending against the emergencies that he puts you in, then you'll be on your way to being able to utilize the three E's. Quick story from my high school days that I think really illustrates this idea of the opposites is my senior year of high school. I was expecting to be the number one player unchallenged. I had been the number one player my sophomore and junior year, but we had a new player on the team, and he was younger than me, and he was faster, a better athlete, and he had this Western forehand with big topspin that was very unusual, and we hadn't seen it a lot yet in the game. And he was a good player, and the very first time I played him, he beat me very soundly. So the high school coach was thinking that this new player was going to be number one, and I would be a very strong number two. Probably would have made for a stronger team if we had played it that way. But I figured out that my new opponent did not like the ball if you hit it straight at him. He made lots of errors if he was standing in the middle of the court and had to just maneuver himself around to make space to hit. If you made him run side to side, which most of us always did, because that was the sound strategy against most players, he was terrific. He was terrific at hitting the ball on the run. So that idea of the two opposites, I learned at a very young age, and it helped me. I actually never lost to that player again. So made a dilemma for my high school coach, but it was a great lesson when Peter taught me about the two opposites. I flashed back on that memory and realized that as a competitor, that helped me a lot. The final thing that we're going to talk about in strategy today is the idea of just understanding that your mistakes count as much as your opponent's winners, and your opponent's mistakes count as much as your winners. A lot of times players think that they have to win the point. It's much, much better if you can make your opponent lose the point. So when you go out there and play, keep that in mind. Think of the game of basketball. How different would basketball be if every time you took a shot and missed it, your opponent got 2 or 3 points? The game would become very different. Everybody would be afraid to shoot. A typical basketball shooting percentage, if they shoot 40 or 50%, they're superheroes. But if you only make 50% of your shots in tennis, you're going to lose a lot of matches because your errors are points for your opponent. So I hope this gets you thinking about strategy, and we're going to get into some very interesting ideas in the coming weeks. Thanks a lot. Go out there and be joyful.